Welcome to Doc NYC's Spring Showcase. It's our mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. I'm Karen McMullen, and I'm a senior programmer at the festival. And it's my pleasure to be speaking with the filmmaking team of National Geographic's Fauci, with directors John Hoffman and Janet Tobias, and producer Dan Cogan. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to be
Thank
here.
you.
What a wonderful film. It is so nice to spend time with someone who's been in our living rooms for the past 2 years every day. And, I know personally I've been very worried about Dr. Fauci and his sanity and his safety, and I pray for him holding on. And I was really pleased to see during this film just what a strong guy he is. He has all that New York chutzpah and just the strength of his character, and he's solid as a rock. So I feel relieved. I feel hopeful for the nation. So, he has been in and out of the public eye for like 50 years. What made you decide to do a documentary about him at this juncture?
John, why don't you take it?
Well, it was the emerging pandemic. I mean, it was COVID it was clear that COVID was going to become, a dramatic turn in the nation and the world's health and safety. And Fauci, in a very, quick amount of time, became a public figure known to everybody in the nation. And so it was Dan's team of John Barden and his wife, Ali Moss, who also produced the film, who called me and said, look, we got to do a film about Fauci. I had worked with him on a previous series. His wife was also in that. And I reached out to the NIH to see about his willingness to be profiled. And they came back in a matter of hours saying that, he was very open and they would love the idea, but did I know Janet Tobias? And so Janet, I pass it to you about why you were working with him.
And our group had done a film called Unseen Enemy in 2017 about the 21st century threat of pandemics before COVID. And I was on some panels with Tony, and we began talking about doing a film together. And first we launched into an effort around the AIDS vaccine. And in that process, I sort of asked him, has anyone asked you about doing a film about your life? Because you're the longest important public servant in American government. And he said, let me think about it. And then he came back and said, yeah, I would be interested. So we had the great fortune of asking him before COVID if he would be interested, and he'd said yes. And then John called me, and I thought we need to team up with the very best people to do the film, because he's now in everyone's living room and everyone knows him.
It's true. I mean, that was very prescient of you to have done the Unseen Enemy documentary. Did you feel like, can you talk about the correlation of those two?
Yeah, I think the joke I often say to people is we decided to do Unseen Enemy in 2013, before Ebola and before Zika. And then Ebola happened and Zika happened. And we all really thought, wow, this is something that could happen on a gigantic scale. And then we finished Unseen Enemy talking about that. And so when COVID happened, I think I was both not surprised and also horrified that, a lot of people have been talking about this, but not enough had been done in preparation for what happened to all of us around the world.
Mm-hmm. How has, oftentimes documentaries have the benefit of perspective or some distance, or you get to see the subject in the rear view window. And we don't here. We're still right in the middle of COVID. Can you talk about how your film is being received? Since it's not like COVID is over.
Dan, you want to start on that one?
Well, one thing that's been exciting was being able to work with Nat Geo on the film, which understands public service, and they understand medicine and science. And they also have the film on Disney Plus, which I think is a wonderful place to have it. And, part of what I was hoping to do when we made the film was give young people a model of public service, of this is something that they could aspire to in their lives. And I think having on Disney Plus has enabled us to reach, tens of millions of young people with the example of Dr. Fauci. And what we've heard back is that people are seeing it, adults are seeing it, kids are seeing it, people are watching as families. And that message of what it means to engage in public service, both the value of it and the price of it at times, particularly in polarized times, is coming through to people. And that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, one of the things I was excited to learn in the documentary was how I'm going to call him Mr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci. I can't call him Tony. Dr. Fauci, his childhood, his upbringing in the Jesuit, this formation in the Jesuit faith, informed this desire for public service. And it's just so I don't know, I just found it very powerful to see how dedicated he was to, this cause. And it is based on public service. It's not a job for him. He talks about how he's a workaholic and how married he is to his job. Can you talk about what you were surprised to learn about Dr. Fauci during all the time you spent with him?
I think that I don't know if it was a surprise, but I think one of the most touching things and one of the most heartwarming things was to really come to understand about his relationship with his family, and how important that is to him, how they are really the foundation on which everything is built, both the upbringing that he had and the love he had from his parents, his relationship with his sister, but it is his primary family now, of his wife and his daughters, that is so important to him. I think that Tony is somebody who demonstrates so much control, and it's so important to him because, for the sake of public health, he has to be someone who understands the science, and he's in command of everything that he's going to impart to people. And so he's often very measured, and he's very, sort of consistent. But the threats to him and his family made him and continue to make him very angry. And so to see someone who you primarily know through the media, as you do, to get a sort of a peek behind the curtain and see that what he's been going through does bring out true anger against those who he doesn't care, the people who are threatening him. It's the people who are threatening his wife and daughters that really gets him angry.
And Karen, I think the thing that over time of knowing him, that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but I really came to understand, and I didn't understand it for the first year or two of knowing him, is Tony feels incredibly deeply about patients in all ways. So that for him, an epidemic isn't just an epidemic, it's individual people and individual families and individual communities and the toll of disease on those people. And that there were a number of times throughout our filming, in interviews that John did when we took him to the White Flags, in moments in his office, when tears would come to the corner of his eyes. And that's not what you see when he's in front of a microphone, nor should it be when he's in the White House or giving a press briefing. But he understands at the end of the day that an epidemic is about the toll on people, and that the race to stop it is to preserve people's lives and to preserve children's futures, and that it really gets to the core of who he is and gets to his heart.
Let's pivot for a moment and talk about you all's work process. How COVID has affected all of us, obviously, and we've all had to make our major adjustments. Can you talk about the challenges you had in making a film during this period?
Well, they were tremendous because we started filming in April of 20. So it was just right after lockdown. And while we were shooting, and Janet was the one who made the very generous move to DC to create a bubble with Tony, and she can talk about that and who else was a part of that. But we created a very small team. We're scrambling to learn, with Dan's help and Story Syndicate's help, and working with the DGA. How do we navigate this uncharted, territory? So it was tense. I mean, this is when we don't know how the virus is being transmitted, when we're putting those Amazon boxes out in the sun to kill what we think is a virus that might be living on the cardboard. So that's the condition in which we started shooting. And Janet, you should talk about what you did to make it safe for yourself and everyone else.
There were the cinematographer Zach Nicholson and I moved down to DC and lived in an apartment and then a bigger house. And there was one team member, Zach Wood from Washington, and we essentially created our own bubble and limited contact with all outside people because, as I say, the last thing you want is to be in the press as the person who infected Tony Fauci with COVID. And we lived in that bubble and met him outside of his house initially, and then were allowed to ride along to work and ultimately go to the office. But it was a very small bubble of people to do that. And then, Dan, if I remember correctly, Story Syndicate had sort of relatively recently moved into new offices and had to move out and create a whole infrastructure for us to send rushes to. And
it was a nightmare. I mean, we had literally signed a lease in February on new offices, and then COVID hit in March, and we had 10 different edits going, and we had to instantaneously make them remote edits. And we literally had our head of post-production buying computers and reprogramming them with new software and adding chips so that he could himself turn them into remote editing machines. And in like a week, he had turned it around. But it was an incredibly tumultuous time. And Janet and John were just trying to do the best they could to follow Dr. Fauci through that within the bounds of what was safe. As Janet said, like, the worst thing that could possibly happen is that we got Dr. Fauci sick and he couldn't be affected. So we just did everything we could not to have that happen.
Documentary filmmaking is hard on a good day. Just can't even imagine. How did it affect your artistic choices? Were there things that you had originally envisioned on capturing that had to be pivoted because of COVID? Or what other artistic choices did you have to navigate?
Well, we sold the film with this very simple sort of premise, which this is the story of a man whose character was forged in HIV and tested in COVID. And so we knew that there was a remarkable archive of Fauci in the through the span of the 40 years of the HIV AIDS epidemic, but in particular, those very important early years. So that was known from the get-go, that we would be comparing and contrasting the man and in these two pandemics of our time. How we would do that, the ways we would go back and forth in time, we knew that was going to be discovered in the edit as the archive was sort of revealing itself, and also then the verite that Janet was getting. I think that one of the challenges of the film is that scenes, for the most part, occur when people are interacting with one another. Tony was isolated the way we all were. So when he was at the office, for all intents and purposes, he was alone. That I think presented some unexpected challenges of how to really follow him in a way that's going to show him engaging with people beyond the Zoom conversations that he was in.
And Karen, I would add to that, documentaries are based on trust. And although both John and I had prior relationships with Dr. Fauci, he was in the middle of the biggest health crisis of his life, working, essentially sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night. And so it was a painstaking process of having him trust us, to understand that work always came first. We were never going to do anything that would interfere with his work or the work for keeping the nation as safe as he could. And so bit by bit, we were able to get more access to him, because he trusted us as a group to understand that and to work within the constraints of that.
Can you, I was an editor for many years, so I know you live with a lot of wonderful things that you were privy to that didn't make it into the final cut. Is there any anecdote or any scene that was very particularly dear to you that didn't make it, that you'd like to share with the audience?
I have one. Dan and John.
Please go ahead, Janet.
Hopefully we're all thinking the same thing. So Janet, let's see if
I bet, John, that so when Tony was in elementary school, is that it, John?
it's
Yeah, so when Tony was in, John Barden, Story Syndicate, particularly, I think, fought for this, and I agreed, is that when Tony was in elementary school, a nun in religion class said, if you don't go to church on Sundays, you will burn in hell. And the 7-year-old Tony Fauci said, wow, bad, that's terrible. Okay, burning in hell. And he knew that his grandfather didn't go to church. His Italian grandfather didn't go to church on Sunday. So he went and he asked his grandfather, why don't you go to church? And his grandfather said, my house, my community is my church, right? And so he went back to the nun and said, do you really burn in hell if you don't go to church? And she said, absolutely, he will burn in hell. And so Tony thought, I think there's something wrong with this setup. So I thought that's the future scientist, or like the scenes from broadcast news when we're meeting the future producer and anchor and other characters. That's the future scientist.
That's funny. At 7, right? Our characters don't change that much. Can you talk a bit about your work, your collaborative process, the three of you? How do you co-direct? And Dan, when do you jump in? How much weight do you get on the producing side?
Well, really, Janet was leading the process of shooting. She was down there with Fauci. John was leading the process of collecting the archival and figuring out story, and then we worked together on the big picture. So that was kind of how we divided it.
All right. That's easy. That's easy division of labor there. So back to Dr. Fauci, who suffered greatly under the previous administration. Do you feel that there's been a lessening of this vilification of science, and that he's having an easier time now under the current administration?
I imagine you guys have a perspective on this. I'm curious to hear what it is.
Janet, I think that you should start on this one, because I think you're more in touch with Tony right now and sensing how much pressure he's feeling.
I don't think it's gotten that much easier. I think there was a reprieve when there was a change of administrations in some of the pressure, but I think he's become a sort of lightning rod, a political lightning rod for used by a variety of people in political ways, which enrages him, because he doesn't think of himself as he's adept at moving through government and being political in that sense, but he is not a politician. No one knows, as Susan Rice says, how he votes, what party he belongs to. And so I think he feels that it is unrelenting, and the attacks continue at an equally high level, which I've found actually quite surprising. He's had as many threats since the changeover as he did before.
I think we just have to hope that there's not a more dangerous variant. I think that at least in this country, even though cases are going up, hospitalizations don't seem to be. So I think that the tension around the pandemic for the nation has lessened somewhat. But if a new, more dangerous variant arrives and we have to return to some level of, restrictions, and Tony's asked to weigh in on that, I think it'll just all start up and be as bad as ever.
Well, fingers crossed that it won't come to that.
Right.
And Dr. Fauci, is he talking at all about retiring? Like, what are his plans? Does he have a successor in mind? Is he going to pass the torch? What do you think his plans are for the future? Did he share those with you?
I think he always has I think Dr. Grady would like for him to just take a vacation. I think that would make her his wife. They could only take a vacation. That would make her really happy.
He's not going to overstay his welcome. As long as he feels effective, he's going to be there. But if he starts to feel that he is, losing that effectiveness, I don't think that he's going to embarrass himself. I think that he has more than earned the right to step aside when the timing is right. If he's not stepping aside, then he must feel that he is the right person to be in that position still.
We were talking a little bit earlier about his hobbies. He does have a hobby that he was sharing with Janet. Do you want to share that with us?
Well, he and his wife, Christine, go out on walks that people have seen, they see in the film and they've seen on television. And Tony said that he became an avid birder when he moved to DC because he wanted to do something different than he'd done in New York. And so he's a really good birder. And actually his daughter, Jenny, who is in the film, is as good as her father. And they send birding pictures back and forth. So I would see his and Christine's excitement when I was there and then see the pictures. And so they convinced me. And now I go to Central Park and have become a birder in Central Park, which I never thought would have been possible. And so I am also trying to send pictures back and forth. So there is he is a happy birder.
Based on the film, I can't see where he has time to do these things, but I'm glad that he does have a way to unplug. Can you guys tell us just what you have coming up next? I think, Dan, you're working on Mayor Pete. Is that next?
Well, we as a company are, making lots of different things, films and series for most of the different streamers right now. So all kinds of different things. And I miss a little bit our engagement with Fauci because, he's such an exciting figure to interact with. But I don't know, John and Janet are directors. I'm running a company, so it's a little bit different, maybe a little more specific for them.
Well, I can't be specific about what the films are, but there's one film in production with Story Syndicate, which will be done in the fall, and something else that's hopefully going to start up in the fall. But I can't unfortunately tell you what the content is.
And Karen, people sort of make fun of me because I jump around topics. My first feature was a World War II Holocaust story, but and I've done health stories and stuff. I'm working on something on basketball.
That's fun.
Yeah, it is actually really fun.
It's good to mix it up. Well, I think we're out of time. It's been really wonderful talking to you. I enjoyed the film so much, as I'm sure the audience did. If you want to share this wonderful film, Fauci, with your friends and family, it's going to be on Disney+. Please tune in there. Please come back to Doc NYC's showcase for more films. We have, I think, 3 more in our series. And again, thank you very much to co-directors John Hoffman and Janet Tobias and producer Dan Cogan.
Thank you so much, Karen. Be well, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.